Yes, and that is helpful. Thank you. Along that same line, on the overall licensing of the athletes or the participants, I understand that with the judges, those who are judging the meets or bouts, each year they have to have an eye exam as I read the bill. With the participants or the professionals, I didn't see a renewal there. That I see that there has to be an initial medical exam, including where requested a neurological one, but I didn't see a renewal. So if you're licensed in the state of New York, unless there is an extenuating circumstance from a previous bout, are you just licensed in perpetuity, or like our driver's license, we renew every few years? Is
No,
there
I
a
think
renewal here?
Yeah, I'm sorry. If you refer to Section 1010, licenses of professionals, paragraph 2, any professional applying for a license or renewal of a license to participate under this article shall undergo a comprehensive physical exam, including clinical neurological examinations by a physician approved by the commission. That would include looking at the permanent medical record. So as the State Athletic Commission may determine that licenses are for a period of time, a year, 2 years, I will say I don't know the answer to that as it relates to boxing, but you have to reapply for licensure, and each time you do that, you would have to undergo that physical exam, including a neurological exam. It could require an MRI. It could require other things that the commission may determine in their rules and regulations. But it's not only about the initial application for licensure, it's for every time you go to renew.
So there will be a renewal, we just don't know the period.
Yeah, I apologize. I could check and find out. Obviously, as it relates to professional, the Athletic Commission hasn't established yet the rules and regulations, but if it mirrors boxing, there will be a renewal period, and obviously the bill anticipates a renewal and says every time a participant wishes to renew their license, they would have to go through the same battery of tests.
Okay. As you know, I am particularly concerned with brain injuries and concussions, so that is very helpful. I appreciate it. Last question. The accident insurance, is that, and there's two different forms, one that is the $50,000 as I read it, and then the $1 million one. Is that the disability insurance? And can you clarify a little of that, please?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. Just to be clear, there are actually three types of insurance that are identified in the bill, and I want to certainly to thank and make note of the chair of the Committee on Tourism, Ms. Markey, who particularly pressed me, as did other members, on the question of insurance for participants. So there's actually three different types of insurance required under the bill. The first is an accident policy for injury sustained in the ring. The second is a death benefit for the unlikely occurrence that a boxer or single discipline martial artist or mixed martial artist die as a result of injury sustained in the ring. Or finally, $1 million, you indicated, where there is life-threatening brain injury as a result of participation in the sport, and that could be not only training, but actually in the ring during a competition. And that would be essentially the injury sustained during a fight, which would require medical attention immediately, and in a physician's opinion, would be life-threatening. And those you clearly, and I'm no physician, but neurological exams and physician exams would indicate that without medical attention, it is a life-threatening illness. So that is $1 million policy. Now, of course, the bill also allows, and this would make sense, that promoters or participants could buy additional insurance, and premiums will be made available if people want to raise the limits, but those are the minimum limits that you would need to have a participation in this state.
Thank you. Thank you for your responsiveness on this and trying to address a number of our concerns over the last few years.
Thank you.
And I do appreciate a number of these changes. On the bill, Mr. Speaker?
On the bill, Ms. Fahey.
While I do appreciate a host of changes and do think that we have a better bill before us than we've had in the last few years, and I commend the sponsors for their responsiveness in trying to address a number of those concerns, it still does not outweigh my overall concerns on this bill. And I do believe in this state that we are putting what I believe are short-term economic development or economic growth issues ahead of what could be long-term health of the athletes and long-term implications for the finances of the taxpayers, particularly as they relate to brain injuries. We know, and we're learning all the time, just in the last few years, we are really learning more and more about the brain and the impact to the brain from a variety of sports. But in a number of those sports, such as football that we've heard a lot about today, hits to the brain or injuries to the brain are often incidental to the game. The gist of the game is not about hitting the head. That is not the case. With regard to MMA or mixed martial arts, that really is more intentional and not just incidental to the game or to the sport. So while I do believe the violence of this sport does concern me, it is the increasing discoveries of the neurological impacts that we are seeing in other sports and particularly seeing in this, and that we've moved well beyond the comments and concerns from the days of boxing when somebody would be punch drunk. Just last week, I think it's interesting that less than a week ago, we saw the NFL come out with the comments and recognition that there is a direct correlation to concussions and the hits to the brain sustained by players and concussions and the CTE, the chronic traumatic encephalopathy injuries. I know I said that wrong. Thank you. As well as we're also seeing just in the last few months the changes that the U.S. Soccer Commission is making. And just late last year, they've eliminated in the sport for those who are children aged 10 and under, they've eliminated any heading of the ball because of concerns about early injuries to the brain, and they're limiting it for 10 to 13-year-olds as well to just practicing where they can head the ball. While those are different sports and the impact is not as dramatic, I do believe in the next 10 to 20 years we will learn so much more. In some ways, what we know about the brain is really at a very elementary stage, and that's why we are seeing new changes. There's even changes discussed for youth football around this country. So I do believe that the concerns here and the higher incident of brain trauma, even over boxing, that does raise serious concerns about where we're heading. And I just want to read one excerpt, and it's actually from 2008, and I think we've learned a lot more since then, but it's from the American Academy of Neurology. And they issued a statement, a position statement on sports that include intentional trauma to the brain. And in their conclusion, again in 2008, they said sports that include intentional trauma to the brain, including boxing, mixed martial arts, and extreme fighting, are a serious threat to the neurological function of those who engage in them. Formal studies have shown, it's just 3 sentences here, so bear with me. Formal studies have shown that even with protective gear, measurable, persistent damage to the brain occurs, with some participants suffering serious neurological damage. Children who are even more susceptible to this damage in these sports, especially when they begin at an early level, are becoming increasingly involved in the sport. And while I understand that, and that's the end of their conclusion, while I understand that the sport certainly does not authorize children to participate, in fact, you have to be 18 or older, and I very much appreciate that, we know that by legalizing mixed martial arts in New York, we will see a rise, if not a dramatic escalation in the sport in this state. So children will be watching, and children will be entering informally at a much younger level, which also very much concerns me. So while I very much appreciate the changes that have been made, one of the comments that we've heard a number of times over the last few years is that New York is the last state, the only state that's been a holdout to regulating or to legalizing professional fighting. And this is one of those times when, quite frankly, I'm proud to be a New Yorker, and I'm proud that we have held off on this. I'd like to think personally that we'd hold off longer, especially since the brain research is is growing leaps and bounds just in the last few years. So I see this as New York being a holdout, showing again that we are leaders and not just going to follow the pack. I'd like to see us remain leaders and wait for the health research to be more thorough here in terms of the long-term impact on these fighters. I would also like to see us just put brains first. We spend a lot of time in this body talking about the need for investments, and I tend to make a lot of my decisions based on economic development and where we can best grow our jobs. But this is not an investment that I believe is a long-term one for the future. I think in the end that this may end up costing taxpayers more. The National Football League, again, where the trauma is nowhere near the level it is in this sport, they've paid out an estimated $765 million to a few thousand former professional football players. So it is running in the hundreds of millions in terms of damages for athletes who have been injured. So again, I just believe that moving forward on this now is counterproductive to what we know and where we want to be as a state, and I encourage my colleagues to vote no, and I will be voting no on this measure today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Ms. Fahey. Ms. Arroyo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank and congratulate the sponsor because in the past I was against this bill, but the improvement have convinced me that it's time to make a decision. And I'm sure that soon and in a few months we will be making more changes in this law. I'm sure about it. But today I'm ready to vote yes, and thanks for the changes and to convince me that I should vote yes tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arroyo. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield for just a quick question or two?
Will you yield, Mr. Morelli? Sponsor will yield.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Joe. Just a quick question, more out of curiosity than anything else. Looking through the bill on the excise tax of, is it 8.5%, right, on ticket sales?
Correct.
I'm just curious how we got to that number at 8.5% when wrestling and boxing are at 3%.
Well, given that there was some controversy about it, I think in the context of it, I wanted to make sure that it was high enough that it would generate revenues to the state, and so it's an arbitrary number, as all taxes are arbitrary numbers to some degree.
Don't we know it? All right, thank you, Joe. I appreciate that. Mr. Speaker, on the bill.
On the bill.
It's a bill that a long time coming. I will be supportive of this bill. I have to say I'm not a particular fan of MMA, but I believe in freedom and opportunity, and there's a lot of people that enjoy this sport, and they should be able to here in the state of New York, and it is going to be a significant revenue generator. I have to say I'd be remiss to not mention the fact that we had some lobbying money mentioned that was in support of this. I would say that probably just pales in comparison to the money that was spent lobbying against this. So it's, certainly lobbying money can go both ways, but there was a heck of a lot of money spent by a certain union out of Las Vegas to try to prevent this from happening. So credit to Speaker Hasty for letting this get out here for a vote so that the members can speak, and credit to Mr. Morelli for his hard work over the years in getting this to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Nolan.
Mr. Speaker, my colleagues, have listened to the debate, have read some of the material over these many years. I continue to feel I continue to be very strongly opposed. I would urge my colleagues to deeply consider what we're doing here today if we do pass this piece of legislation. The issues with domestic violence, the issues with drug use, the issue with traumatic brain injury on the part of the people who practice this activity are shockingly high in compared to other sports, shockingly high. You can't you can't Google the word without reading incident after incident after incident. I also think it's important to note when we talk about domestic violence and drug use and traumatic brain injury, we're not talking about cartoons in a video game. There was some comment about that earlier. A video game is a cartoon. When you watch something on TV, sometimes it seems like a cartoon, but it's not. It's a real person, a real human life, a real person perhaps from a poor background finding his way or her way out of that background the only way they know how, with their fists. A person who is easily exploited because they don't perhaps have the education, who looks for that $1 in a million. The truth is that most people who participate in anything like this never make a lot of money. A handful at the top, of course, but everyone else is a broken life, a battered body, and perhaps a family structure that's more shattered than when they started. When you look and read, I don't want to be, I never have been graphic on the floor in all the years I'm here, so I will not read it, but some of the domestic violence stories are truly, truly horrific. And you feel nothing but sorrow and pity for the people who got suckered in, who thought if they could play this, they'd make money, and instead they're in prison. Their partner, a battered person with permanent injuries. I don't understand why we think moving this to the New York stage is going to be helpful to these people. It is not something we need in our state for tourism. We have Niagara Falls. If you're going to Niagara, you're there for the falls, not for the fights. If you're at Madison Square Garden, you're there for a team sport like basketball. This is not a team sport. And I think, colleagues, we have to think long and hard when we take these type of steps as to what the consequences, the unintended consequences, will be. At what price liberty, in a sense? You know, we all have free will. We do what we wish here. We all vote as our conscience tells us. But I think we have to think long and hard what happens if this was to become law in our state. What will happen to the families and the practitioners? What will happen, as our other colleagues said, as we yet more and more make gambling more and more available to other families in our state? We say we care, we say we want to sanction violence, and yet we are authorizing perhaps the most violent of violent activities. I can't say the word sport. It doesn't strike me as a sport. And I know, colleagues, there are people in my own district who've contacted me. They think this is something they want to watch on TV. And I've said, watch a video game instead. Watch a cartoon character. You know, I had the opportunity once to go to a fight, a boxing match. And I had only seen them as a kid on TV, you know, the great 60s fights. It was really shocking to realize the level of violence in that sport. And we are working to change and perhaps make some, address the issues of traumatic brain injury among fighters. I certainly never went to another one. I was completely turned off. Now, everyone has their own personal decision on something like that. I'm not suggesting that everyone is, you know, everyone has different interests. But I think we have to be careful when we authorize another violent sport that may indeed result in more traumatic brain injuries. I did have one question, Mr. Speaker, for the sponsor, which is why normally for this I would explain my vote, but I would like...
Mr. Morelli, will you yield?
Thank you.
Yes, of course.
You yield.
I know that our colleagues in the federal government, after seeing the deterioration of the great fighter Muhammad Ali and so many others, in 1999 or 2000 created some type of coverage or sports act to deal with it. But in some of the research I did on this bill, the UFC is not party to that, and mixed martial artists are not party to that. So I wondered if the sponsor could explain what that federal legislation did for the boxers, that we're not doing it for these people.
I'm not familiar with it. I do note that the bill requires a study to be commissioned by the State Athletic Commission to look at the long-term effects on all combative sports, but I'm not familiar with the federal legislation.
I think if we were serious, Mr. Speaker, about putting a bill here we would be looking at the protection that boxers were offered. This is a much more violent sport than even boxing, and I think what the feds did in '99 bears something that could have been considered, but somehow was not. And I think, not an expert in the issue, but I think that's the type of thing we should have been considering. Instead, we're talking about temporary work permits so you can get clobbered. I don't even understand it. So I would urge my colleagues to think long and hard, to consider voting no on something that is so significant. What will happen after, if this bill was to become law, what will happen to the families involved? What will happen to gambling in our state? What will happen to domestic violence? What will happen to steroid use? What kind of example are we sending, mostly our sons, when we say that so many people in this industry have been involved in steroid use? What kind of message are we sending when we vote to legalize something that we all know is extremely problematic and has been problematic worldwide? I think we have to answer that question not at this time, Mr. Speaker, and I would urge my colleagues to vote in the negative.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan. Mr. Rivera.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think it was about a couple of years ago or 3 years ago, I think I approached the sponsor and I expressed some of my concern. And some of those concerns I've heard throughout this debate back and forth over here. And I can tell you, having grown up, having been raised in the South Bronx, I know what you're afraid of. Oh, I don't know what you're afraid of. You're afraid of violence? You're lucky you didn't grow up in the South Bronx like I did, because when I went to a park, I was chased back to my neighborhood. And when I ran to my neighborhood, people that looked like Chad Barrett or me and said, "You're a punk. Why are you running away from them? You got to stand up and fight back." I said, "But I'm a skinny kid. I can't fight those big guys, You fight to win." Oh, yeah, I learned the art to fight to win. I will begin by surprising you. When you throw your first punch, I already kick you below the belt. I kick you behind the belt. And then you hear my opponent say, "You don't fight fair." No, I fight to defend myself. You have no right to attack me, to offend me. All that violence changed somewhat because the civil rights struggle. People were taught you got to respect others no matter what they look like. So I grew up in a violent society. Don't preach to me. I got the scars on my forehead, throughout my body, defending myself so that I can survive and someday be standing here and listen to all of you concerned about violence and how it affects every other issue that we are so concerned about, that we seem to demonize this particular bill or this issue based on some legitimate, probably concern. I got 3 wonderful grandchildren. They don't live in the Bronx. They live in a neighborhood that, is so well off that there's nothing to fear. You don't have to, when you run out into the neighborhood park, you have to defend yourself. But however, I just got this message. Let me read it to you. God bless Facebook. Tell your people to legalize MMA already. For a state that prides itself on being first, New York is the last in the country to legalize it. Why does everyone else know that New York hasn't figured out yet how to make money other than high rent and property taxes? I said, "Can I use your name?" He said, "As long as he doesn't get me into trouble." I said to him, "My son, what are you afraid of?" His name is Rodney. His name is Rodney. Rodney's watching TV, his mother, and all my grandchildren. Rodney loves his children. And he puts them to school, private school, and after school they go to learn the art of self-defense. 7-year-old grandchild, and Milo, my 12-year-old grandchild. They're learning the art of self-defense. And they are taught not to use their talent to abuse others or to defend themselves in case. If I were to go back to a neighborhood, I'd be afraid of fighting O'Donnell because I think he will also fight to win. You know? But let me tell you something. It's true. It's a very violent sport. So it seems. Rodney told me, Dad, please, 2 or 3 years ago, let me show you something in slow motion. Dad, you were for the generation that you will see in the early days on television, black and white, and you will see so much violence. You will see Antonino Rocca fly through the air from one corner and kick his opponent out of the ring, wrestling. It's all rehearsed, it's all time. He put me through, and he sort of convinced me that this so-called kickboxing is also very well rehearsed, and nobody in the right mind is going to go intentionally and kick or kill someone. Regulation is going to be part of this bill. You know, we regulate boxing, that's true, and it's violent. I mean, we remember Mike Tyson with Evander Holyfield. We remember him. He was a champion. He didn't want to lose the title. He set out to win. He took it to the extreme. Punching Evander was not enough. He had to chew on his ear and bite it off. We got regulation. That's not allowed. Yeah, someone mentioned Muhammad Ali, my champion, because he gave up his boxing championship for something he did not believe in. Go fight and kill brown people that never heard him, and he lost his championship for 3 years. And when he came back, he was told by his manager, I would not come back if I were you. But it was his choice, Muhammad Ali, to come back and prove that he was still the greatest. And for the remainder of the years that he demonstrated he was the greatest, he finally was punched a lot and in the head, and he is in the shape he is. But it was his choice. It was his choice. I sit here and I hear why we should not do this, and yet we have sat here and we have debated why people's right to whatever they believe in or whichever way their lifestyle is should be recognized and respected and defended and protected. Well, there are significant amount of numbers in this state that they rush to small businesses, or what do you call it? The hangout places, whatever you call it, Applebee's, where I eat once in a while, and to watch sports. And they see it. They watch it and say, why isn't it in New York? Why isn't it legalized? Well, we're tempted to do that right now. So what I'm saying is, at the end of this, Rodney convinced me that, you know, that this is the right thing to do. No matter what, it will be like an economic boost for many of our neighborhoods if we allow this to happen and to take place in the city of New York. So, having said that, you have an idea that I have had a change of heart, and I'm going to go the Morelli way, because at the end of this all, Morelli is a young leader in this body, and I hope that since those of us who follow him will be able to look at everybody's face and not feel sad or bad for having to try to convince all of you. So many wants this, let's give it to them. I'm not going to get in the ring to kick anybody, or to defend myself. I'm too old to do that. I just don't hang out late at night, you know? Having said that, I thank you for your patience, Mr. Speaker, and you have an idea which way I'm going to vote. Hey, Rodney, I hope I make you happy.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. Mr. Tatone.